few years ago, I used to make various different like bookish vlogs over on Swell Publication. It's kind of on a permanent hiatus right now. We're not kind of doing any active work, but also not willing to kind of give up any hopes for the future on that channel. But I was having a think. I really enjoyed making those book vlogs. They were just really fun. So I thought that I would maybe start trying to get back into them, because reading is one of the things that brings me joy, and I actually really enjoy making those vlogs. For the last 2 years, I've had a set list of books that I've been wanting to read, and I just haven't gotten around to them. So I thought I would get around to some of those for this year. They're all various different like spooky or creepy kind of themed to go with October and Halloween spooky vibes. This is my list so far. I've got a Stephen King. I've chosen The Dark Half, which is a story about a writer who decides not to write under his pseudonym anymore and essentially kill off his pseudonym name. But little does he know that his pseudonym name has come to life and has a murderous rage that he wants to inflict on the writer. Next is classic Frankenstein. I've never actually read Frankenstein. I've been wanting to read it for ages. I'm a little nervous. I don't think I'm gonna like it, but you can't have an opinion unless you actually read the book. So I'm interested to find out what I think of one of the OG classic horror stories. Then I've got Into the Drowning Deep, and I've been wanting to read this book for years, but I've been wanting to read it at like an October spooky kind of time, because it's about sirens, it's about murder mermaids, and if you have heard me talk about anything before, you should know that I love mermaids. I love Ariel, and I love the, you know, the sweet, beauteous creatures that have been portrayed on screen, but I really adore the siren, the murderous siren, and this is what this book is kind of about. And I'm super, super, super excited to read this, but I'm also a little bit scared because I think I might get a little spooked. Last on my physical list is Meddling Kids. This is kind of like a reimagining of the Mystery Inc. gang. So Ellie and I adore Scooby-Doo, and this is kind of like the Fred character, I believe, is murdered, and the team has to kind of come back together and figure out what's going on. I've got one so far on my Kindle. It's called Her Favourite Jack-O-Lantern by Rebecca Rennick. It is the second in a series. I really enjoyed the first, and it's a bit more of like a light, fluffy Halloween romance to break up in between all the intense, scary vibes. So those are my 5 books that I want to read. So I'm visiting Dubbo with my parents at the moment, and it is quite warm, and I love the sun and the warmth, so I've been really enjoying getting outside and having cold drinks. So really enjoying iced teas at the moment as my bevy of choice whilst reading. Now, I have read the first 10 pages or so of Frankenstein. I am not jamming with the writing style. I knew this is probably going to be the case. I generally don't connect with the writing style of older books, particularly classics. They tend to read quite differently, which is always, you know, a good challenge to do and not just read the same thing over and over and over again. But I've had an idea. So Ellie was reading audiobooks for her school stuff, and I've had a look, and there is a Christopher Lee version of Frankenstein available online. So I thought, I have a little Halloween set of overalls that I'm in the middle of sewing. So I thought maybe I will put the audiobook on instead and read that whilst I finish up sewing my Halloween overalls. In the meantime, I do have a bit of a confession in that before I started filming this vlog, I had already started reading some of the books because I only decided I was going to start vlogging yesterday. So I thought I'd give you a bit of an update on what I've read so far. So Stephen King's The Dark Half, I finished this a few days ago. It was kind of cool because it's connected to the previous book that I've read of Stephen King's Needful Things. The bad thing is I did some research after I finished this book, and Needful Things is technically the fourth in a series of books that revolve around similar characters in a similar location. This is book number 3. So the way that I'm going about this series is technically reading it in reverse order, which is probably not the best thing to do, but it was kind of cool because one of the characters, the detective, was in Needful Things. So it was kind of cool to see a bit more of him in this book. Now, I really enjoyed the overall story, the whole premise of a pseudonym coming to life in a murderous rampage. I'm doing a bit of reading about how Stephen King himself went through a very similar kind of thing when he announced that he was writing under the name Richard Bachman. So he was writing under Stephen King and this pseudonym, and kind of came out and just started writing as Stephen King. There was a lot of meta-narrative that was discussed, which was really cool. I might put a quote here where he talked about the way that writers create, which is really cool. The main character was fairly likable overall. I liked the fact that he was like a family man and that him and his wife were really like a tag team. They had a set of twins in the way that they parented. It really was both of them putting in effort into the parenting, which I thought was quite refreshing. What I didn't like, something that really ground my gears a lot, was that on multiple occasions the detective and our main character both referred to a couple of the victims as whores or sluts. And I just didn't really understand the choice of doing that. I know that in Needful Things it was done for effect, where a few different characters referred to women by these words, and it really was a way of dictating time and place, and it didn't really seem to have place in here. So it did kind of come across with a couple of like almost misogynistic kind of tones a couple of times in the book. I found it to be very, very slow getting into the actual story itself. So there were like murders that were happening, and it was kind of like connections getting closer and closer and closer to our main character, and our detective trying to come to terms with the fact that maybe a supernatural reason to the murders may make more sense than something that seems more logical. But through these murders as they kind of went, it read more as something that was going, here's not what's happening, as opposed to, you know, the characters investigating and finding out what is happening. And it went quite slow for a long time, and maybe that was just me getting impatient because I want to read some other stuff. But the last 150 pages, once our protagonist, our author, and his evil protagonist twin kind of meet, I was hooked and I could not put it down. Whilst I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, I do look upon it overall with a positive outlook, and I'm still looking forward to reading more Stephen King's. So that was the first one that I read. Then I needed a little break from kind of spooky stuff. I just needed something to kind of pep me up so I didn't get into any kind of like valley after reading Stephen King, because it did have a bit of a slow start before it ramped up to the end. So on my Kindle, I was in the middle of reading A Soul to Heal, which is the second in a series of Duskwalker Brides. It had been a month since I'd picked this up. I did not finish my last job in the best manner, and reading was something that really took a hit because I just was so ridiculously stressed and anxious that I couldn't do anything. So I decided to pick that up and finish it up. I had 200 pages to go and I really enjoyed it. I just really enjoyed the world overall. I loved seeing the way that she represented our Duskwalker character, Nameless, and the way that he grows throughout the story. I really, really enjoyed the representation of a plus-size female character. As someone who is on the larger size, the way that she talked about her body and did not shy away from the fact that she is fat and she has rolls, and there are things that she's anxious about, like her stomach, and seeing her work her way into a really loving and trusting relationship, I thought was absolutely beautiful. And then I have started Hollow by Karina Halley. I loved her book A Ship of Bones and Teeth. So when I found out that she had just released this book Hollow, which is a sexy retelling of Sleepy Hollow that is a duology. The first is out, is Hollow, and later on this month the second is going to come out called Legend. So I thought I would read this and maybe try and squeeze in Legend before the end of the month. I am 40% of the way through this book so far. It took me a little bit to get into the book, and I don't think that's anything to do with the writing. That is to do with me and the fact that I generally don't go towards kind of more historical kind of settings. Just is not my cup of tea, and you kind of do need to have a basic understanding of the historical setting to understand the context surrounding these actions. So far, our female character, Katrina, who prefers to go by Kat, she's a little witch. She's just gone off to witchy poo school. She's kind of heartbroken because the boy that she was meant to marry just disappeared, which is kind of rude. And now she's gone to the school, and what do you know, there's kind of a sexy professor there who happens to be interested in her back. Today I am going to do a bit more reading. I was hoping to try and finish Hollow. That is still in the works. I'm also in the middle of working on a couple of reading spreadsheets, which is very important. Tiana and I are absolutely, utterly obsessed with the upcoming Ball Gowns and Books event that's going to be coming to Sydney in 2025. So I'm going to start putting together a spreadsheet of the authors who've been announced to make sure that we can try and read as many as we can before the event, just to get more out of the event and hopefully discover some new authors that we might want to read along the way. I've been reading for about an hour this morning, so I thought I might have a break, enjoy my bevy, and work on that spreadsheet before I get back to some reading. I finished Frankenstein. It's about all I have to say about that. I was not a fan of this at all. I respect it as a book because of the role that this is played in science fiction, but I think that it wasn't written well. It had so many tangential narratives for a 200-page book that really didn't contribute to any of the characters or the plot. So Dr. Frankenstein himself was just awful. He was a horrible human being, and I don't support him or his choices. He did not own up to any of his actions. He was just like, but I'm smart, so, you know, murder happens. Okay, Dr. Frankenstein. But I do think that there was a bit in the middle where Frankenstein's monster goes to like this village, and he kind of gets to meet some different people. And there's this really interesting narrative point where this like kid comes up to him and starts screaming and ranting like, there's a monster, there's a monster. And I think that raises a really good point, because Frankenstein's monster then says, you know, why are you screaming? I've got no intention to hurt you. You know, that's just how I look. Why are you making a judgment about me? And I think that narrative plot point.
I'm so sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
I thought you were raising your hand in class.
I just wanted to let you know that I needed to interrupt.
Ellie is here and she's sick, poor bugger. I think that does raise an interesting narrative plot point that is very relevant today about judging people based on how they look rather than their ability or their intention or the way that they communicate or anything like that. So in that way, I do think that was still relevant and was somewhat interesting. The fact that I gave up on reading the physical copy and ended up doing the audiobook performed by Christopher Lee was the best choice I could have made, because I was so bored by this, but he really got into the different characters and did different voices. I'm really glad that I chose to do that in the end for this. I gave it 2 stars out of 5. It was okay. That's all I really have to say about it. It has a place in history. It's why it's a classic, but I have no intention of really ever reading this again. But it would be really interesting to go back and watch the film adaptations of this book after having read it, because so much of what, you know, is in the collective mind of society of what is Frankenstein is not actually what's in the book. It's from the original film, where we think about, you know, the Frankenstein's monster with the bolt through his head and the lightning and the way that he can't talk and communicate. In the book, he's just made, and then he goes away for a bit and learns English, and it's done in a sentence. It's not interesting, and I didn't really enjoy the book at all. But I enjoyed Christopher Lee's performance, so it's kind of this weird, I think the only reason I gave it 2 stars was because of the performance aspect of the audiobook. So it's one of those things where performance can sometimes enhance the reading experience. So yeah, that's done. The next book I want to get to is Meddling Kids, which is the Mystery Inc. retelling. I'm feeling a bit like overwhelmed, not overwhelmed, I'm just feeling a bit whelmed by the macabre material, and I think I just want something that's a bit fun before I get into anything else. So yesterday I went and created a spreadsheet for the Ball Gowns and Books event, and I've read one of them so far, and there's like 25 that have been announced. So I've gone through, I've made a spreadsheet, and I want to start reading through some of their work, so I'm a bit more familiar with some of the people who are going to be going. So I thought I might go and read like a fluffy romance in between. I still have to finish Hollow anyway. I've got about 2 hours of Hollow to finish before I go into any further reading, but that's where my head's at. I think I just need something silly, something fluffy, something fun before I get into some more death and mystery. I forgot to mention in my previous clip, it's not that I don't like older material. Like, I'm a massive fan of Edgar Allan Poe and Perfume and The Picture of Dorian Gray. Like, I'm familiar with older, thrillery, horror-based kind of material, and I'm a fan of those. And even though there's still, you know, writing plot points where I'm not the biggest fan, like in The Fall of the House of Usher, where it takes like 2 pages to describe walking up the stairs. It's not necessary. But the plot points and the story are so much more interesting than what was described in Frankenstein. So I think that's more kind of like where my qualm comes from. The fact that this monster exists, is created, we get a tiny fraction of his life and don't explore anything to do with it. We don't explore what it means to be human, which is what sci-fi really is. And I think that would have made for a much more interesting story, something much more compelling than just he exists, he kills people, and then he comes to pay respects to the guy who created him, despite the fact that they never got along. So last night I completed a couple of books, but today is my birthday. And at the moment I'm home alone because my family's at work. We'll be celebrating together a little later today. I finished off Hello. I enjoyed it, but it promised a throuple that doesn't get delivered until the next book that's released later this month, which I wasn't aware of at the time of picking it up, so I was a little disappointed at the time, but that's all going to come. I actually really enjoy her writing. I think she's really good at world building, but also keeping things sexy and the characters interesting. I didn't like this one as much as A Ship of Bones and Teeth. I think that purely comes down to the subject material. I'm going to connect more with a book about mermaids. So that's not on her, that's not on her writing, that was just down to me connecting with the material itself. There was a scene at the very, very start of the book where one of the couples hooked up. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way a bit. It felt like he really took advantage of her in that situation, and I've read quite a few reviews where a few people have felt the same way and have not continued with the book as a result. But I enjoyed it for the most part. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm excited to see how it resolves in the sequel, which will release on the 30th of October. so I'll be reading that on Monday the 30th. In my last update, I mentioned that I want to start catching up on all the Ball Gowns and Books authors. So I made a spreadsheet that is hourly getting updated because they keep releasing more authors. That is amazing, but I've only read one author so far on the list of over 20 authors, and I don't want to just read like one book from every author. If there's a series, I'd really like to complete the series. So where possible, I'm picking standalones or shorter stories just to kind of catch up and see if I like that author before committing to an entire series. I finished Cursed by Kayla Rain last night in the bath. Cursed is a reverse harem short story retelling of Sleeping Beauty, and look, I didn't think it was the best because it was in the short story format. To be honest, I would have loved to have seen this concept expanded into a full book. I enjoyed the concept of it, which was set in a modern day setting, but our characters had lineage through to like ancient lore. So we had a whole bunch of, there was like some witches and vampires, and there was a coven of sirens, typical me, went to the sirens, who were responsible for the Great Flood, which I was really interested in the whole lore of this world that was being built. And then I went to look and see if this was like in the world of any of her other books, because I was really interested, but it seems like it is literally just a singular standalone novella. It's only 100 pages, so if you're interested in smutty romance or fantasy or storybook retellings, go for it. I think it's a great one to pick up. Now, I really should be getting on to Meddling Kids, but it's my birthday and I don't really want to read a mystery or thriller on my birthday. Whilst I enjoy them, it's not my genre of choice. So instead I've gone back to one of my comfort reads, which is Ice Planet Barbarians. I'm up to book number 4. They're only short books, so I thought I could read that and the honeymoon novella that comes afterwards and just jump back into a world that brings me such joy on my birthday whilst I'm alone. Now I'm going to go enjoy my iced tea. I might grab a spot of lunch, do some reading, and then gonna go grab a couple of drinks with some of my family's friends for birthday celebrations.
What would be eerier? The fact that the house is completely destroyed, or there has been signs of a struggle, or the fact that it's just as she left it, completely spotless, but no one there. Because they're saying that, oh, you know, these people must have been sitting at the table and had gone without a fuss, but there's blood on the wall, there's broken stuff, the doors are broken in.
I've seen Harry Potter. I know that magic can just make it bad, and then the man's a couch.
This is actually way more comfy for me.
Well, in case anyone was wondering, I had a lovely birthday. I ended up reading not just 1, but 3 Ice Planet Barbarian books. I read number 4 and really enjoyed it. I read the subsequent honeymoon novella and really enjoyed it. And then I read the Ice Planet Holiday short story, and that was my favorite of the 3, and really enjoyed all of those options. And I'm really glad that I chose to kind of take a break from the kind of Halloween themed reads to do something that I kind of genuinely do really enjoy and really like. There's just something about this world of Not Hoth and these aliens and these girls that it hits me like warm and cuddly and gives me a sense of comfort, and I just really like it. I can't tell you it's the most incredibly written book, but I do think that for a book that primarily is a smutty read, there is significantly more plot and world development than I have read in several other much more well-known books that are widely popular, compared to something that, you know, really is designed purely for entertainment and not for literary value or critique. I'm really looking forward to finishing this series, but at the same time I'm like, I don't want to finish the series because it is such a place of comfort that I come back to. I read the third one a few weeks ago when I finished my job because I was so ridiculously stressed out of my mind. I went to that place of comfort. It actually took me so much to pick up Meddling Kids. Sad story, I dropped this last night and it's got like a little tear in the cover. So kind of pissed off about that. I think part of what I'm not enjoying about this is because it was sold to me as a Scooby-Doo retelling. And you can tell like the elements of, you know, the character structure are there, but it's just not so far. I'm not enjoying any of the characters and the story's not really going anywhere, but it's a mystery, so I guess we have to set it up. I have to get through the exposition to get to the more interesting stuff. So I will stick with it. So I'm currently going between reading that one and then picking up my Kindle Unlimited reads. I'm currently working through the Deal with the Demon series by Katie Roberts. I'm on number 3. So I'm kind of flicking back and forth between a book that I don't particularly like and one that I do. Overall though, I'm quite impressed with the volume at which I've read. I don't normally read this quantity. So for that reason, I'm deciding to do a part 2 to this vlog. I'm back to work from next week, so I don't imagine I'm going to do quite as many quantity next time, but we'll see how the month finishes. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!